Hi, I'm Forrest Claassen, the Synod Executive of the Synod of the Trinity. A couple of weeks ago at the annual Synod Assembly, I gave this report to the Assembly, and a number of people afterwards asked if it had been recorded. It hadn't, but they were interested anyway, and so I am recording it now so that you can use it if you find it helpful with your presbyteries or congregations. This is the State of the Synod for 2022. I'll start by saying a bit of a reminder of what our priorities are. The Synod's 6 ends are connecting presbytery leaders for mutual support and encouragement, encouraging innovation, supporting education and nurture, pursuing presbytery partnerships with each other, connecting with the larger church, and fostering justice and righteousness. There are a lot more words to the way we spell those out, but that's a general summary of them. Of those 6, the Synod's Governing Commission has chosen for this year to focus on 3 in particular. Those are connecting presbytery leaders, encouraging innovation, and fostering justice and righteousness. What I'd like to do in this talk is mention some things that I've observed in my first year as Synod Executive here and how those fit in with our priorities. But first, let me mention a couple of obvious things that need to be mentioned. 1, the market has affected us. It affected us last year too, but in the other direction. This year, we've had to make draws against our investment pool. But the good news is that even with the market correction that we've seen, the Synod has still not had to make an exception to our financial policies in the course of those draws. Having said that, the reality still is that making our budget work still depends on the projected per capita and mission giving from presbyteries. We have intentionally kept per capita low. We know the squeeze that your presbyteries face, but we ask that you take a look at the year as it's ending and see where you stand with your commitments to the Synod. Second, the pandemic has affected us. All of you have seen in your congregations and your presbyteries what it means that people are no longer around in the same way. We find ourselves wondering, are they coming back to church? Are they still being cautious and watching from home? Are they gone for good? We don't know, and it may be quite a while until we know. But in the meantime, what we do know is that we are in a new era of doing church, and we have to figure out how to make that work. So with those realities acknowledged, I'd like to talk a little bit then about what I've seen and learned in the course of being here for the first year. So here's learning 1. Geography matters. The hills and the hollers and the rivers matter. The things that separate us in significant ways. I saw that on a carpool with Sheldon Sorga, the presbytery leader for Pittsburgh Presbytery, this last January as we drove from Pittsburgh to a meeting in State College. In Southern California, the cities grew up around the freeways, so the freeways defined the culture. People there don't hesitate to drive for 30 minutes past dozens of churches on Sunday morning to get to the one they like. But here, the freeways came late. And driving to State College that day, I found myself realizing that before the freeways were here, it would have been an enormous task just to get over the hill to the next valley to meet other people. So people have learned to stay put. And we have been conditioned over generations to let the hills and the hollers and the rivers separate us, even after the highways arrived. But if the hills and the hollers and the rivers matter, The bridges and the highways matter too. And so does Zoom. Just last week, or a couple of weeks ago now, just a week before the Synod Assembly, the executive presbyters met at Chrisland Conference Center. It's a beautiful place, but it's the very definition of off the grid. There is no cell service at all, which was admittedly kind of nice. But they do have Starlink. And so, for better or for worse, we had good connections for keeping track of business at home. It's not cheap, but it may be a way of connecting people who have otherwise not had reliable connection to the internet. So geography matters, but we are being drawn together in new ways that we haven't been before. And that raises the first question I'd like for you to consider, which is, in what ways might new avenues for connection expand the possibilities within our own minds? My second observation is this: the Synod is full of overlooked people. You can see in the picture that there's somebody there by their shadow, but we can't see them. And the thing that I've noticed this year is that many people across the Synod are hidden. Now, some of that hiddenness, some of that isolation may be because of a well-earned mistrust of outsiders. I've heard stories of rural white folk and urban Black folk alike. And in each case, the stories talk about how outsiders came along and suggested they were going to make things better. And they ended up making things better for someone, but not for the folks who were already there. So what's it like now that the coal companies have left? And who benefited from the renovation of the Hill District in Pittsburgh? So these people have hidden away. And the best that an outsider can hope to be is what the Hill folk call Jaspers. An outsider who don't know much, but at least doesn't seem to deserve any animosity yet. And maybe we in the institutional structures have responded to their wariness with our own disregard. If they're not interested, if they don't take the initiative, then maybe we just let them go about their business and pay them no mind. So that leads to my next question. What does it mean to make the invisible people, the overlooked and the disregarded, visible to the rest of us? And what does it mean to tell them, we see you, we care, and really mean it, and earn their belief that they actually do think we care? Observation 3. Grants go to people who ask. This is actually a corollary to number 2. Those who are more likely to be well-resourced. The presbytery staffs that have time to fill out papers, people who are experienced in working application processes, even people who just happen to have a good internet connection and know how to use it. Those are the ones who are more likely to ask for grants. I had this experience early on when my predecessor, Sue Wonderland, had put out an all-call for presbyteries to request money for technology upgrades so that they could do their Zoom calls more effectively. And all she did was send out a piece of paper saying, ask for money, give us a quick proposal, and we'll give you up to $7,500 to do it. And guess what profession was the person from who turned in the first application? He was an academic by career. He turned in an application because he knew how to ask for money. He had been doing it his whole job life. I find that very interesting, and I find myself thinking we've got to figure out how to get to people who don't know how to ask for money. So I'm not telling those of you who are well connected and well versed in paperwork to back off. I want your applications too, especially if they're on behalf of people in your spaces who need what the applications can provide. But I'm asking for help in getting the less connected folks into the buffet line as well. So that triggers my third question. How do we get the opportunities out more broadly to the hidden and disconnected people within the Synod? People who could benefit from what we offer, but don't even have the resources to pursue it. On the topic of grant making, our grant making processes right now then are responsive, not proactive. We receive applications, and then we decide which of those applications to fund. We annually budget a sizable amount of money for innovation grants, and a slightly smaller but still sizable amount of that money stays on the table from one year to the next. So in 2022, we budgeted $100,000 for innovation on the part of the presbyteries. Of that, only $40,000 was spent. And that $40,000 was mostly spent on 2 projects, and that money was the largest we've seen in the last 5 years. I think perhaps that the processes inside the Synod need to figure out how to flip. We need to figure out how to flip those processes so that we're going out and looking for what we want to fund, especially in the invisible places among the invisible people, not just waiting for people who are already well connected to turn in their applications. So how then do we not just respond to good ideas? How do we encourage and promote them? Next observation. Finding pastors is a struggle. I'll make sense of this picture in a minute. Presbytery leaders repeatedly tell me that their churches are struggling to replace the pastors that are retiring. They just can't find new ministers. Some of the churches are getting priced out. The cost of a full-time pastor exceeds congregations' expectations for what they can afford. And this can be true whether it's a rural congregation or an urban one, whether your congregation is populated by a racial majority or a racial minority. But also, and this is where the photo comes into play, recent seminary graduates are more interested in starting something new than in continuing what's already happening. It's like our churches have become our carefully curated collections of depression glass. We're hearing from the millennials that they aren't interested in inheriting that carefully curated collection. And now, as we reach the end of our lives, we're wondering what to do with it. I don't have any depression glass, but my daughter, for instance, has told me in no uncertain terms that she doesn't want any of my academic or pastoral papers when I die. So I've threatened to stick lots of $20 bills in random places in the file boxes so that she has to go through them. My wife thinks I'm being cruel. And yeah, I probably won't end up doing that. But the questions are there, right? How are we to imagine a new kind of relationship between pastor and congregation? if the full-time model of years gone by can't continue? And what are we to do with the possibility that our grandchildren may be no more interested in inheriting the church that we have carefully curated than our collections of depression glass? Next observation. Populating leadership teams is a struggle. Just as the presbyteries are facing a growing shortage of minister members, they are facing a harder and harder time of staffing up the leadership structures within the presbytery. By this, I don't mean paid staff leadership. Some of your presbyteries are well endowed enough to pay for staff long after the majority of minister members are gone. The issue is, who will work on the Committee on Ministry? Who will the nominating committee recruit? Does that picture look like any of your committee meetings these days? So it raises the question for me, how can we scale down our work so that we do only what we're able to do? All of these questions have emerged for me as I've made these observations over the course of the first year in being your Synod Executive. I've found myself thinking. I've found myself wondering. And I hope that you'll work with me in looking for answers to these questions together. But let me make a suggestion for how we look. Because I believe that the answers will not be structural ones, at least not at first. The answers instead will begin like wildflowers, with small actions that gradually come together to form a pattern. These are California poppies. This is from the area where I came from when I moved in January. They just emerge on a beautiful spring day after a heavy rain. We don't organize them, we don't plant them, they come. And those small actions of faithfulness from one church to another will gradually come together to form a pattern. Small, disconnected ministries will converge. And it's not up to us to create the pattern. It's up to us to notice the pattern. This is not an accidental thing. This is the work of the Holy Spirit. So I encourage you, as you struggle with the questions and the observations that I've already lifted up, start small. Act faithfully. Don't worry about solving all the problems. Let the growth come. But watch for what it's doing and look for ways that maybe we will end up supporting with our institutions and our structures the direction that the Spirit wants to take the church next. There's a lot of strength here still. The advisory teams are very helpful for me. Maybe someday I'll get promoted from Jasper, but for now I am very grateful for the local insight. I'm very grateful for the Budget and Finance Committee who helped figure out that yes, we could make that Ukraine Challenge grant work, and then figured out that we could do even more because of the overwhelming response from churches like yours. I'm grateful for the personnel advisory team who helped me find my way through building a staff budget for next year, and the grants advisory teams that provided strong responses when I didn't trust my own judgment. You are managed well, And even more, you have shown me that we have tenacious power to stay the course in ministry and tremendous power to act in a common response. And I see among you presbytery leaders who are still working the problem, figuring out where to go next. So maybe it is our time to decrease, like John the Baptist said when Jesus was becoming preeminent, that Jesus will be more and we will be less. But we still have a good word to share. It's a word that's different. It's a word that's worth telling. It's a word that speaks of a God so gracious that no matter how badly off course we get, God has not written us off. It's a word that speaks of a God so powerful that no matter how badly the circumstances around us conspire to end us, God can still do something great through us. It speaks of a God so just that no matter how small and invisible we seem, God has not overlooked us. I look forward to the time ahead with you and to discovering together what God is doing in our midst. Thank you.